say it's kind of amazing what Dublin UX has achieved. By 200 UX designers in a room together is quite an achievement in Dublin. I can remember when you could fit every Dublin UX designer in the snug in Keogh's on a Friday evening. We used to call it pints after work, and that was in 1998 when we started out. So myself and Henry are directors of frontend.com. We're a UX design consultancy. We started in 1998. Which is pretty much makes us the oldest UX design consultancy on planet Earth. We go back a long way. And just to make recognition easier, we're standing in the right order in case you guys are struggling to figure that out. So this is us in the 1990s, and the 1990s is a long time ago. I'm aware of the fact that quite a lot of people in this room probably weren't really around in the 1990s. Some of you all look so young. So just a quick recap. This is the 1990s. This is what iPads looked like in the 1990s. This is how UX designers got around in the 1990s. And a thing called the internet made it on the front cover of Time magazine in the 1990s. So, I mean, you know, it's all pretty rad time and a lot of stuff going on. So around about this time, we decided that we'd set up a UX design consultancy. Pretty prescient, huh? And we said, yeah, let's give it a go. So since then, we've built a global business. We're based out of Dublin. We've done project work in over 20 countries around the world. Our expertise spans a broad range of different industries, everything from finance and fintech through to consumer, enterprise product and line services. This is the last corporate slide you will see tonight, okay? So rest assured, no more logos after this. So tonight we're here to talk about the future of healthcare, or more exactly, how to design for the future of healthcare. And it's a story I'm going to tell in 3 parts. I've made these kind of interesting little chapter pieces for you to kind of get a synopsis of what's coming. Also serves as a bit of an aid to memoir for myself, so I know what I'm supposed to be talking about. I won't read this out, but to give you some of the highlights, there's a surprise phone call. We do battle with some poor packaging, we get well paid, and then we stumble into a world where the customer always comes last. Followed by meeting lots of people who've never even heard of UX design, leading to a brave proclamation by Henry in front of lots of people who actually have heard quite a lot about UX design, but we'll get through all of that in a moment, okay? So it all starts about 10 years ago, and I'm sitting in the studio in 2010, and the phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and it's these guys. And it says, hi, we're Roche.
You said that was the last logo.
Hmm?
No more logos.
It's the second last logo. Hi, we're Roche. You may have heard of us. We're one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world, but we have a problem. I was like, okay, you've got my attention. We have a product that patients don't necessarily like to use. Maybe you can help us figure out why. So I said, I don't know, we can take a look, you know. So we had a look, and it turned out they had a pretty shitty UX. Here's the proof. This is how the product comes out of the box. This is all the stuff. You need to assemble it and put it together yourself and figure it all out. There are 15 pieces of documentation here, but you only need one of them to actually sort the product out. Side note, if you ever ask a UX designer what the problem with your product is, 9 out of 10 times they'll tell you you have a shitty UX. Just beware, anybody who's not in UX here. So we worked with them to solve the problem. You know, which boosted sales, reduced training time. We cut support costs. We won a few awards along the way. But we also learned a lot. You know, we learned that, first of all, healthcare companies are great companies to work with. Their problems are important to fix. And they like to do lots of research, which works really well with the kind of way we all work, okay? And finally, I guess, you know, the most important thing, they have very big budgets, you know, so this is a key point. So I had one of those light bulb moments, you know. I thought, hey, we should try to do more of this stuff, right? I mean, you know, this is my core business philosophy. You know, if it worked once, well, maybe, you know, it'll work again. So we started looking around healthcare. We started kind of seeing, well, what other problems are there out there that we could solve? You know, something meaty that we could sink our teeth into. And you know, the amazing thing is, once you lift the curtain on healthcare and you start looking inside what's going on, it's just amazing how many problems you find. I mean, it's kind of hard to describe, but this kind of sums it up a little bit. I'll let you decide yourselves which one is Henry and which is me. But we were literally falling into a world full of problems that UX designers are just born to solve. And the bar is incredibly low. Design is poor. Generally speaking, there's lots of low-hanging fruit, or in this case, low-hanging sausages. So erase that mental image I've just created, sorry. Just stick with low-hanging fruit, okay? But joking aside, when you start looking at the healthcare sector, these problems are pretty serious, and some of them cost lives. Just look at what happens to the patient experience. So this is a graph that shows patients' adherence to medication they've been prescribed. Typically chronic patients that are taking life-saving medication. These diseases include diabetes, cardiovascular, respiratory, even cancer. And you can see something happening here, which is that very quickly into your treatment program, patients disengage. They stop taking their drugs. They stop believing in the medication. They disengage from the service. And this is a symptom of the poor patient user experience that's delivered. And this causes lives, this costs lives, okay? So, I mean, you know, there are 50% of us not taking the medication that's prescribed to us, and there's 125 people die each year from non-adherence to drugs in the US alone. So it's a serious problem and worth considering. It's also a complex, and it's a really risk-laden system. Every 100 patients that get admitted to a hospital, there's going to be 14 adverse events. Adverse events is medical tech jargon for mistakes get made. 43 million avoidable injuries, 23 million years of healthy life are lost each year in the US. And it's like an incredibly fragmented system when it comes to technology. Billions of dollars are spent every year creating electronic health records and software that do not share data. It's like spending billions on a bridge that goes nowhere. You know, it is crazy. Doctors are spending more time trying to work with electronic health records than they are actually spending with patients. The average ER doctor will make 4,000 clicks per shift. This is nuts. I mean, you have to, I know there's a lot of UX designers here, but unless you've actually stood in front of an electronic health record system and had a look at it, you really don't know how bad these things are designed, okay? So there's like really poor affordance everywhere. And this leads to deaths. This compounds the problem, okay? Every year there are like thousands of incidents where doctors misdiagnose or nurses mistreat or pharmacies misprescribe because of the information that is held within these systems is not correctly presented and mistakes get made. Interfaces that are so badly designed, they're actually killing people. Mismatched records, incorrect test results, poorly presented data. It's just confusing. It's confusing for everybody. And the almost unbelievable reality that the entire health service is held together with a glue called fax machines in this day and age in 2019. And this is not Ireland I'm talking about. I'm talking about the US, I'm talking about Germany, I'm talking about countries all over the world. When you want to send your test results from oncology to another department in the hospital, more than likely your physician is taking those results and feeding them into a fax machine, and they're going to get faxed over. You can't email because it's not compliant. So you guys are UX designers, right? You're problem solvers. You're probably all thinking right now exactly what I was thinking when we found this out. Let's UX the absolute shit out of this. We are going to become global superstars. We are going to solve the health service crisis. All these problems are fixable. Inefficient systems, poor integration, overworked staff, outdated infrastructure. It's all the meat and potatoes of what UX designers do every day, right? We were so confident that Henry stood up in front of hundreds of people and boldly proclaimed that the digital healthcare revolution was already upon us. Well, it's coming, it said. This was 5 years ago. in 2014. And well, we're still waiting. So I think it's high time that Henry stood up here and explained to you where the digital healthcare revolution went.
Yes, actually, it's a little bit historiographical. This part of it, what I'd like to say is that it hasn't changed a whole load, to be honest. At the time, it was complicated. It's complicated now. And, you know, we've worked consistently on healthcare products since then, and we have had a look at some of these things. And what we've done here is try to explain why the things that we've seen face-to-face with doctors and nurses and patients are also reflected in research and data and things that you can read yourselves. This is the original poster. So the first thing it's obvious we're going to design patient-centric healthcare because it's all about the patient. We've got to absolutely do this for the patient. And so this wasn't our idea. A lot of people have this, and everybody has one of these diagrams, whether you're a healthcare provider or a drug company or whatever, with a patient somewhere in the center. This is mine. The problem is that when you try to deal with healthcare systems, there's always multiple stakeholders, typically 5, patients, the doctors, nurses or carers, the providers who are usually either a hospital or a clinic or somebody like that, and then the payers. And you kind of have to balance the needs of all of these parties to get anything across the line. So if you do something that's too good for the patient, it generally or will likely make the world of the doctors and nurses worse. If you do something for the patients, the doctors and the nurses, it's likely that it will probably make the world for the insurance company worse, and they won't be able to pay for it. So you have to kind of get something that balances the needs of everybody, and that is properly hard. UX designers and everybody from California is continuously trying to disrupt stuff. It's become kind of innovation, disruption, and you just don't need to do that in the healthcare system. That's the way to lose sales, first of all. Nothing will ever happen. The healthcare system is really, really, really nervous about disruption. I think that the basic problem is that they essentially see it as chaos. It's a type of chaos. You know, you can improve, you can innovate, you can optimize, but don't disrupt, because that'll just set everything off and it'll all go to hell. One of our clients actually said last week in Switzerland, you know, our entire strategy is to disrupt the healthcare system without using the word disrupt ever. Okay. So improve, optimize is what we have to do. Innovate by all means. And I'd like to say that, you know, we never seem to get to work on systems like, you know, digital MRIs or things like that actually do make a difference. It's always the kind of information systems around that hold all of these really important things together that we get to work on. And it's much harder to make those pay. Big data. I mean, any data. You know, using data is really, really hard in healthcare. The big thing that people don't realize is that they already have a hell of a lot of data. You know, this is a stat from Forbes. It's like 665 terabytes per year in the average US hospital. The doctors personally and you know, in academic things say, we don't need any more data. We can't use the data that we have. Okay, we can't use it to make decisions. So what we do instead, and what we've always done, which is we talk to the patient. We listen to what they say. We observe how they react, how they move around, and we use that to make decisions. So at the moment, healthcare systems or EHRs tend to have an awful lot of interaction, an awful lot of information. The doctor is sitting there, looking at the screen, not talking to the patient. This is providing a very bad experience for both players. And what we really need to do as designers, and rarely get the chance to be honest, is to make these systems completely unintrusive at the point of care so that the doctor never really has to look at the system. Everybody has an app, right? Of course. The problem is that an app on its own does nothing in healthcare, generally. So you've got to make your app talk to the EHR or some record system. It's got to be regulated and then recorded and logged or whatever. And making your app talk to their app is really hard. Just how hard? I went to this guy. Okay, So he said, 10 years ago, we're going to put a lot of money into EHRs. We're going to get all the paper out of the hospital system, and it's going to make things much, much better really quickly. It'll make Medicaid and Medicare much cheaper to deliver, is the idea. A big slug is 36 billion over 10 years, okay? So they weren't hanging around. And what they found is it was much harder than we expected. I think 5 years ago I could have told them this. None of the systems talk to each other already. It's really, really fragmented. And in fact, that 36 billion is very hard to measure any sensible outcome. Standards, which are the real solution to all of these things, are on the way. Since 1987, HL7 started. I just looked it up today. And I've been saying to clients, well, what are you doing about standards? And they say, nothing. There's nothing we can use yet. I'm a reductionist, okay? The idea that suddenly a new system is going to make everything else that's there already simpler is just wrong, okay? And assuming that the solution to anything is digital is also, well, this is Frank actually, I'll just read it out because Frank, you don't want to read that out, Frank? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just because there isn't a digital solution, don't assume that adding one will make it better. We've seen it quite a lot on the ground. The digital systems, when they're additive and don't replace something else, make things worse, okay? So, there's the right at the point of care problem, which is I can't refer to this, or I can't find the right page, or I'm looking at the screen when I should be looking at the patient. And then there's the nurse who has to support this system because nobody knows how to use it. It's an app that the patient is supposed to use, and he's got a username and password which he forgets about once a week, and he has fat fingers, and so essentially the nurse sorts all of that stuff out for the healthcare system when she's not really supposed to be doing it because there's nobody else. Getting somebody to pay is very hard, apart from Barack, who seems to be happy to pay, but in real life, it's very, very hard to pay, and deciding who's going to pay is even harder. So, I love this. It's obviously inverted because they're trying to pay. Nobody is trying to pay, believe me. There's this effect that we've seen several of our clients where a really good product is brought into a hospital, and they say, well, of course we'll pilot this for you for free. And then they go and prove that this is very effective and would save them money. And the hospital absolutely refuse to pay any money for the product once they have to pay for it. They just lose it. So it's kind of like freemium, where you never really pay for Spotify, or one doesn't often pay for Spotify. Essentially, nobody really wants to pay for a benefit down the line. If it's not immediate and a saving now, it won't work. Go to Frank.
So thanks for all your excuses there, Henry, and why we haven't got our digital healthcare revolution. But it's not all doom and gloom, and we're not here today to say that it's a futile task or that you can't improve. So in this final chapter, this is my chance to kind of post-rationalize about some of the work we've done and to explain how successful it was or maybe why it wasn't, before Henry will answer some of your difficult questions during the Q&A. So I'm going to show you 4 projects, which we'll talk about in varying levels of detail. We've got 5 minutes. And why they worked or maybe why they didn't. And I'm going to start with this one, which is from about 5 years ago. And it's a really interesting project because in a way it was kind of ahead of its time. Hence, it was from 5 years ago, because that's when everyone was thinking the digital healthcare revolution was upon us, right? But basically, this is a connected healthcare management solution that provided kind of an interface for patients, an interface for doctors, and it also had a triage interface that could be monitored by a call center. And of course, with the beauty of a smartphone, you can track patients, you can monitor them, using Internet of Things, you can have wireless blood pressure monitors and heart rate monitors and all sorts of devices in your house. Feeding all of that information into your phone, capturing the data, showing it to the patient so they know how they're doing, and then transmitting that data to the clinician who can get a 360 view of how you're doing outside of his care. I mean, it sounds awesome, and absolutely is awesome. And when we showed it to patients, they told us it was awesome. I mean, within 2 minutes of using this app and testing it for us in various hospitals around the world, patients are saying, I love it. It's amazing. This is my communication tool with my physician. This is like, I mean, it makes me feel like I'm being cared about. It makes me feel like I'm being looked after. It's fantastic. We then went to neurologists and rheumatologists, who were two of the treatment areas that we were working with, and we kind of presented the desktop version to them. And I'm not joking, one literally slid the laptop off the table and onto the floor. I do not want more data. I have more important things to be doing. I could be writing a paper for the New England Journal, I think was one of those things he told me. And so, you know, it's a really interesting dichotomy, and it's not because this doctor didn't care about the patients he's looking after. He's just fed up of new technology. Like, they have, you know, 40 different systems, like guys queuing up outside the door to come in and paying them to use these systems. Like Henry said, they're willing to use it for free, but they won't pay for it. It's even worse than that. The companies who make these systems pay the doctors to use them, and they'll use them while they're being paid because the hospitals are underfunded and they need the revenue. But once the funding stops, it's like straight out the door. We're not using that piece of shit anymore because it's just like occupying all my nurses with no time to treat the patients. This is not working, right? So what was wrong here? Well, there's too much data. I mean, as technologists and as UX designers, we often think that data solves all the problems. And really, you know, in the healthcare scenario, doctors aren't looking for more data. They're looking for insights. If you can provide them with an actionable insight, this patient needs to do this. That's something he can't really quickly do right now without doing an exam. But telling him that the patient's blood pressure is high, or telling him that, like, you know, the patient didn't sleep, like, or slept 2 hours less last night, not really going to make that much difference. Furthermore, it places an onus on the doctor to actually monitor that data. So if the doctor has access to the data and something adverse happens and they didn't see it coming, then that doctor bears a responsibility. Also, there's too much duplication of work here. So this system needed to be integrated with the EHR system. It required patient records, data, test results. A lot of stuff needed to be transposed into this to make it work. And it was too disruptive of the methods that were going on. It basically required doctors and nurses in neurology departments to completely reimagine how they treat patients and work in a new way. All of which we think are good things, right? We think as UX designers, I certainly do, that if we can disrupt something but we can show that it's faster, it's better, and it's more efficient, everyone will want to do it. Not necessarily how it works in the real. So this product, sadly, as you might have guessed, never made it into the market. It failed at the regulatory phase. It was a drug agnostic platform, which meant that any drug could be placed in the platform, and it just became too difficult to regulate and to get through the regulations. So after 3 years of work and like many millions of investment, some of which we received, it failed to make any difference to patients. So we move on to something that was a little less ambitious, but much more successful. So this was a product we designed for Merck. Merck pioneered the smart injector about 10 years ago, which is a device that means that a patient can inject themselves regularly with a set kind of amount of medication, and it records that dosage, it records when you dosed, and it sends it to the cloud. So this app was a way of taking the data from the smart injector, presenting it to the patient, but also transmitting it back to the HCP. It was for children, actually, primarily children to early adult who had a growth hormone deficiency, and they need to inject themselves once a day, every day, from the moment you're diagnosed until the moment you stop the treatment, maybe 20, 30 years later. If you're not adherent, if you don't keep injecting yourself, the medication stops working. And this device has helped prove that fact. So they've actually done clinical studies using the device to show the efficacy of stringent adherence as opposed to loose adherence over long periods of time. But the key to why this one was successful and the other one wasn't were two things, really. One was that this product had very limited functionality. It worked with one drug, and therefore we could design much more tightly. We didn't have to create a system that could cater for any drug. The second thing was that there was very limited HCP interaction. We learned from our previous experiences that doctors don't necessarily want to be poring over this data day in, day out. So how this system worked was that all the data that was collected was for the patient. We took everything it measured and we turned it into motivational information for the patient to create an engagement for them with their treatment and to show them like ways of measuring how they were growing, ways of recording, life milestone events, reminders, troubleshooting, all of that kind of stuff. You could order supplies. There's a lot of things you could do through this. From the doctor's point of view, he only needs to look at it once every 6 months or a year, depending on how often he sees the patient. And the patient comes in and they say, "How are you doing, Frank? Have you taken your medication?" And he can see on the screen, he knows exactly what medication I've taken. He doesn't need to ask me, but he can see. And one of the big problems for endocrinologists who treat growth hormone deficiency is that when you see a patient that isn't responding to the treatment, your natural reaction is one of two things. It's the wrong drug or they're not taking the drug. So you have to ask them, are you taking the drug? And if they say, I'm taking the drug, the next recourse is that we're going to change it to a new drug that might work more effectively. Now, if the patient isn't telling the truth, they could be moving from the most effective drug to a less effective drug, and that's not going to have a good outcome. So this removes that uncertainty for them. So in that respect, it's quite successful. So limited HCP interaction. Moving on to something that's even a little bit more obtuse. So there's a system called Floodlight Open. This talks to the big data problem. So Floodlight Open is for patients who suffer from MS, and we've done a lot of work in the MS world. And it's from our friends Roche. But Floodlight is essentially an anonymized data set. So anyone, you guys can, well, actually not in Ireland, if you're in the UK or the US or Switzerland, you can go on the website, you can register, you download the app, and you basically perform a series of tests on your smartphone. So it asks you to kind of pinch tomatoes, or it asks you to trace figure of 8. And it's measuring precisely your speed, your tremor, your accuracy, and over time, it's creating a profile of you as a user, and it charts that profile against the global kind of population of patients who have MS. When you register, it asks you, do you have MS, or are you just curious? If you do have MS, they ask you what type you have, how long you have it, what's your age, some fairly straightforward high-level questions. But that allows them to create a global population. They've got, correct me, 40,000, something like 40,000 users using this. It's a big enough set of numbers. And they can see, and users, you can test yourself as often as you like. So, ideally test every day, but whenever you test, they can chart progression and they can see, analyzing the tremors, analyzing the timings, etc. What do these events mean, and can we predict a relapse? Can we predict a worsening of a patient's illness based on this data? And they can do all of this because it's completely anonymized. So you can actually go to the Floodlight Open site. You can make up a number. Every patient gets a number. You make up a number. You'll see the results that correspond to that number. So you can get right in there, down and dirty, which I think is a really clever way around data privacy, which absolutely, totally stymies the data play for a lot of healthcare companies. Okay, so we've worked at Roche on the following the successive product to this, which is currently in development, where they take what is this open platform and now they're going to try and regulate it and make it into a medical device. But one of the key questions we had, what does the physician's interface look like? What do we show the neurologist? And we just went, well, based on our experience, we don't show them anything. Neurologists don't want to log into these things. We want the neurologist to recommend it to the patient, but the neurologist, there's nothing in here for them, no reason to use it. But if a patient uses it, that's a good thing because, it can be motivating. They can track their own progression. And if they spot something they're worried about, they can bring their phone into the meeting with the neurologist and they can say, hey, look, I've been, here are my numbers. It's not telling me a good story. And then the neurologist can have a conversation with the patient based on those facts, but the onus isn't on the neurologist to log in and dig through all that data. So sometimes no HCP interface is a good way of getting your product accepted, go straight to the patient. And then the last one I'm going to talk about, this is funny, but the vast amount of really successful design changes that we've seen in hospitals and in healthcare aren't digital at all. It's actually paper-based stuff that really makes a difference. You know, there's no login or password to forget with this thing, right? This is simply a piece of paper that the cardiologist fills out, writes a series of targets and scores on, hands it to the patient hands it to their GP the next time they visit, and now that GP knows exactly what the cardiologist told the patient they should be doing. So when the GP does their blood tests and looks at all of their various stats over the next kind of, you know, year, they know what that cardiologist wants the patient to be doing. And they just simply write the results in. And when the patient goes back to the cardiologist, you can take the piece of paper off them and you can read it. Now, you could quite easily design an app to do this, and believe me, it was the first thing we suggested. And the client said, no more apps. I've just been involved in like too many app projects. They get stalled, they don't work, they don't get done, they don't get into production. Can we just do something really simple, like for the Swiss market? You know, let's just do something paper-based. And so this kind of idea that using tangible assets, you know, that somehow something that's digital or in a phone or in a computer or in the cloud is superior to something that's really cheap and easy to implement and that's tangible and that can be handed out quite effectively. You know, it's false. I mean, there's an awful lot of problems that can be solved with really simple tools, and so, you know, we think that this is successful because it's got zero disruption. You know, it fits right into what the cardiologist wants to do. There's no training. I mean, anyone who picks this up knows exactly what they're expected to fill out. There's nothing for the patient to forget. There's no patient support. There's no like phone calls kind of asking, can we kind of, you know, go through how this piece works again. No download. It just simply works. So as a type of solution, you know, maybe the healthcare revolution is coming, but it might not necessarily be digital. It could be service-based. It could be design-based. You know, it doesn't have to be digital. So with that, Henry will now answer your very difficult and technical questions.